Moses has just spent the last 4 decades of his life leading an ungrateful, contentious, and reluctant mob of ex-slaves and their descendants out of Egypt to a land where they would be free, a land promised to them by God. It was being bitten by snakes. It was knowing that you were running around but never moving forward. It was eating manna and more manna with quail as a side dish. It was convincing the Israelites to leave Egypt, and once they finally agreed, it was facing down Pharaoh, one of the most powerful men in the world at that time. Getting the Israelites from Goshen to Jordan was like herding cats, only harder. And during the years in the wilderness made all the longer because the fickle Israelites wouldn't trust God and barely trusted Moses, Moses had to endure the pursuit of Pharaoh's army and had been forced to take on hostile people who didn't want his horde of foreigners tramping through their lands. Yet Moses held this massive group of people together. And he got them at last to the border of the Promised Land. But it was no picnic. It was no walk in the park. It was no cakewalk. And now, with his charges about to enter the land, this land reportedly flowing with milk and honey, God tells Moses that he can view the land from a high vantage point, but he will not live to enter it. Instead, his right-hand man Joshua will lead the people into Canaan. Are you kidding me? That's got to be close to what Moses was thinking. I didn't sign up for this gig, God, and I didn't want to return to Egypt. But you who are who you say you are made me do it. And now you're saying I don't get to enter the land of promise? I don't get to enjoy the fruit of my labors? I don't get to laugh and dance and sing and drink with my people? That's rude, man. I was up on a mountain with you. I took the 10 Commandments down to your people. So what are you telling me now? Tell you what, I do not accept this. This is totally unfair. Who knows what Moses really thought? But if he had thoughts like this, we couldn't blame him, right? We couldn't blame him. Surely the privilege of entering the Promised Land should have been reserved for Moses. He'd earned it with his sweat and his prayers and his tears and his grit. It was rightfully his. He was entitled to some milk and honey. But God said no. Not maybe, no. And the Bible doesn't tell us how Moses felt about all this. You know, he might have understood that he brought this upon himself because of his disobedience by striking the rock instead of speaking to the rock. But really, do you think the punishment fits the crime? You know, he strikes that rock twice instead of speaking to it and is denied access to the Promised Land. You know, that could be what Moses was saying. Yes, I disobeyed, but this is kind of harsh, God, what you're doing to me. And Moses died before he had much time to react to the news. But we gather that his nearness to God helped him to accept the outcome. But here's the question. How do we, you and I, feel when shortchanges us. When we've paid our dues, when we've done our homework, when we've burned the midnight oil, when we've kept our shoulder to the wheel and our nose to the grindstone, when we've poured our heart and our mind and our strength into reaching a goal or fulfilling a dream, then we find that the reward is going to elude us. After all, it's rightfully mine. I earned it. I worked for it. It's rightfully mine. When we, like Moses, are kept out of our personal promised lands for no more reason than that's the way it worked out, can you and I carry on without letting that disappointment make us bitter or cause us to give up? Can we remain healthy and maintain our faith in God despite such turns of events? This capricious unraveling of legitimately earned fulfillment happens to most of us at some time or another. Hardly any of us are immune from it. It happens, for example, when we realize our marriage, although intact, is never going to reach the level of companionship that we hope for. It happens when the company we've worked for faithfully for years downsizes us out of a job or dumps us without an expected promised land. It happens when we reach retirement with plans to travel or enjoy a life of leisure in some other way, only to have it shot down by a sudden loss of health. Now, it doesn't appear that Moses responded to being kept out of the promised land with angerness or bitterness. But perhaps he didn't have time. In verse 4 of the reading, God tells Moses he's only going to get to see the promised land. And in verse 5, bingo, he's dead. Or maybe he was just too tired. Or was ready to let go of the reins. Possibility. But if he did react with anger, we can hardly blame him. For we too feel the injustice of it. But our goals that we have worked for are snatched away from us, just as we finally near the promised land. In life, as we want it to be, things just don't work out that way. In life, as we want it to be, where we always reach our goal, where mom and dad live forever, where our 401k, the bottom never falls out of it. In this land as we want it to be, things just don't work out that way, folks. They don't. And one of the reasons that being closed out of our personal promised lands comes as a blow to us is because of the myths that we've been taught. The myths that we've been taught. Such as, if you want something bad enough and we work hard enough toward it, we will achieve it. And so we go around with a never say die attitude long after the reality has shut certain doors. The fact that we don't always win in life. The fact is that we don't always win in life. We have no guaranteed happy endings. Sometimes we miss out for no other reason than random fickleness or complexity of circumstances. Now, there are some things that we can do to help us survive these times when life slams a door in our face. And one of these things is to try to remember that life is more than arriving at our goals. Sometimes the journey toward our goals, not our arrivals at them, is the main event. Thus, when we're deprived of entry into an unexpected promised land, we pay attention to the path that we still have to where does God want me to go from here? It's hard to start over, folks. Especially when you've had your eye on this goal and suddenly it's denied. The door's slammed. And you have to start over. It's hard. It's painful. Sometimes it's even embarrassing to have to start over. Where does God want me to go from here? And the third thing, although we're not suggesting that God closes doors just to teach us a lesson, we can seek to carry away from these great disappointments whatever helpful things that we can learn. It's kind of like the school of hard knocks. You know, you go to the school of hard knocks, you learn some things in the school of hard knocks that you don't forget real easy. But one of these things is the meaning that comes to us as we go through relinquishment. Relinquishment. And relinquishment is the process of letting go. And it can be horribly painful, as in the instance of losing a loved one. But we cannot carry what is in our past into our future. Our present can be richer because of the relinquishment process. Now, we would gladly trade what we learned from the relinquishment process to have our loved one back. But the point is, when the path to the promised land of the family circle being unbroken is firmly close to us, we can find God helping us in other ways that enable us to continue the journey of our lives. When mom or dad, brother, sister, child, spouse passes away, it's a hard thing. And that promised land of the family circle being unbroken and remaining unbroken suddenly becomes closed to us. It's a difficult, it's a hard and a painful thing. And it's hard for us to continue the journey of our lives. But somewhere along the line, we have to relinquish. But that said, there is a larger faith issue beyond whatever survival mechanisms we can find. And that larger faith issue is this: can we trust God? Can we trust God? You know, the big slammed doors of our life are not God snatching away from us something that He had promised. Although the Hebrews were headed for a land promised to them as a people, Moses had never received a promise from God that he would personally enter. That promise was to the descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob as a whole, but never personally and individually to any one person. And that promise was never made by God to Moses, that Moses would enter the promised land. And so too in our lives, when we lose a job, or a marriage, or a person, or an expected reward, that is not God going back on His word. He never promised those things to us. But we sure like to double load on God. The God I know is big enough to handle any load you want to dump. So can we trust God to give us what He has promised? God never promised us that we wouldn't have to relinquish anything in this life. He never promised us that. But God did promise to be with us through whatever happens. That's what God promised. I'll never leave you nor forsake you. God has promised us that nothing can separate us from His love. Not disappointment, not slammed doors, not pain, not tragedy, not even death can separate us. And this knowledge about God may not make things any less painful, but God never promised us we wouldn't have pain either. But it does give us a way to continue beyond great loss. It permits us to walk away from the tombs of our former hope when the burial of those hopes is over and done. And it helps us to remember that we are not failures as people, even though some important dreams have not succeeded. That doesn't mean we're flunkies and failures. The finest kind of faith is not that which grows out of easy times, folks, but that which continues to trust God's promises despite being closed out where we expected to go. That faith in the tough times is the fine thing. Moses comes close to being